I'm a retired policeman. I like to talk about the dark web. I like to talk about case scenarios where things go wrong. I like to talk about incident management, which is why I would prefer at the minute to be with Carrie in the other hall, listening to the talk on incident management. But because it's an international conference, I thought better do the right thing and talk about what Scotland's doing in this space of trying to create a more cyber resilient digital nation. So sadly, you're now trapped, so you'll stay. And we've got an agreement with Carrie that we don't accept anybody coming in. Keep the numbers. Happy to take questions as we go through. I'm going to do this at speed because that is the pace of change in the world of cyber, and it probably stops you from asking difficult questions when I've moved on to the next subject. So let's go ahead. So we have this incredibly ambitious strategy, and somebody did say, please shoot very high, shoot for the stars, where we want to obviously position Scotland in a great place to be one of the top cyber nations. Generally, that gets a bit of a giggle, to be fair, because we're going to do it by 2020, which is in about 3.5 minutes' time. However, you've got to have high aspirations, but in truth, what we seek to do with our strategy, which is actually about having a resilient nation rather than a cyber-secure nation, because in actual fact it's much more important that we're able to respond, plan for, but when it goes wrong, bounce back from the threats that are appearing across the horizon from this digital age that we live in. And we need people to trust that, in actual fact, the very technology that they use to create our society and innovate is there to be trusted, is there to be resilient, and as we ask, obviously, our citizens and our businesses to take a digital-first approach, then they have confidence, in actual fact, that that's a safe place to do business. So our strategy complements the UK strategy, and indeed, it aligns itself because cyber is pervasive across a bunch of strategies in the Scottish Government. So it's links, and very importantly links to our economic action plan and our digital strategies. It doesn't sit apart, although someone might argue it did. It doesn't now. And it very much links in with the UK strategy, and we are such a pain in the backside of the National Cyber Security Centre that they have given us somebody up in Scotland, which is great. Because they are rapidly becoming and are the single authoritative voice on cyber threat. And just touching on that, it is quite interesting as you look at the slide, when you think about the position the UK has taken. So essentially our security services, who've always operated in the dark, and GCHQ, which is the signals part of it, consider that the threat from cyber is so significant to the UK that they actually go public-facing. So 300 or so of our experts in signals are now public-facing to help now citizens, small businesses, sole traders, medium-sized businesses and enterprises defend themselves against this growing threat. So nowhere else will you have seen such a significant change, and that tells us something about the worries about the threat. That is not a good move. I wonder if it will come back on. So I think the Russians have just got me. But we're back. So that's resilience for you. We're able to bounce back. So we have this strategy that's about actually creating a resilient Scotland. We committed, as part of a programme for government, to actually develop some action plans to do some real things that would make a tangible difference, not just words on paper. And in the last year, over the last year and a bit, we've actually produced and have started to deliver against 5 action plans. And at the top, but it wasn't the first published, was actually learning and skills. So at the heart of everything we do now and we do in the future, and more that we do in the future, is actually getting that, we spoke about education, training, awareness, actually understanding a risk and a threat that in actual fact, in the real world, most of us cannot see, feel, touch, hear. So it's a different threat. Actually getting that in context and being able to do the right thing to help mitigate that and steer ourselves safely in this digital world so we can innovate, so we can actually be very digitally enabled. And when things go wrong, we can bounce back. So I'm going to talk about a few of these things, because in one of them in particular, we're really taking a lead. So I don't lead in this particular area, but learning and skills is really, really critical to how we proceed and whether we actually achieve our aims. And this strategy is, it's got a lot of actions in it. It's quite in depth, but essentially it's about creating a really resilient citizens from early years and having a pipeline that goes right through to the high-end skills that Bill and his team are obviously involved in creating. Some of you guys will be involved. So we really need the skills that allow people to use the technology safely and wisely, but actually encourage people into the whole innovation space with security in mind, and in actual fact create security professionals at the end of it. So that's very important. So it's very important that we embed it in what is normal, rather than it being in isolation and sitting off to the left. Because in actual fact, cybersecurity as a tradition is actually harming itself by setting itself as being something else. Because for the rest of us, the real world, it's that IT thing that somebody else has to deal with. Actually, we all deal with it, and we all need to take responsibility for it. So it's very important that we actually embed the knowledge, the training, and the learning, the pathway, and the skills, so we can actually increase the resilience of our citizens, our businesses, and we can create the high-end skills we need to live and take advantage of the opportunities that are alive in this space for us. And it's, that ultimately pointing towards that developing the cyber and inclusion in that, this cybersecurity workforce and professionals that we actually need in this space. And these are the partnerships that we've got. So the Scottish Government, we kicked that off in collaboration with our partners, but actually it's Education Scotland and Skills Development Scotland that lead this programme of work, because they understand it the best, but obviously not on their own. And in there is the National Cybersecurity Centre, who we involve in everything that we're doing. So just looking at some of the key achievements today, we won't read them all because you can see them up there, but obviously we are the first UK nation to have this continuous spine now of security qualifications, from sort of cradle to grave, which is great. It's a good thing to be able to say about Scotland. And obviously down there, the SQ have worked with the national agency to actually accredit, the Cyber First programme in Scotland. So there's some good stuff going on, albeit acknowledged there's probably a long way for us all to go in this journey. So some good stuff going on. And this upskilling of the teachers and those who educate is critical to this. So we can have all the great advice and guidance and skills available, but if we actually have nobody to deliver that, then you can see it's not going to go that fast. So we recognise there's a whole issue around about some of the delivery of these skills, and that's getting addressed, which is great. And we're influencing the UK and their approach to this, because obviously it's not just Scotland that needs the skills. So very much linked in with them. The public sector action plans, so the public, the private and the third sector action plans are actually really designed round about getting the fundamentals of cyber right in each of these sectors. And because that's the basics, it's the foundations that the Minister spoke about, we need to see cyber enablement as the thing of the future. This links in with the core foundations of living in a digital age. There is a risk, we need to be alive to it, and we need to take the proportionate steps to deal with it. And we see the public sector in Scotland should lead in this area. One, because we have some clout and we have a bit of teeth that we can ask them to get involved. I have to tell you, WannaCry sort of helped an awful lot when 183 CEOs of public sector bodies were asked a hard question on that weekend: will you still be operating on Monday morning? Of which nobody knew the answer. And luckily, all of them did. But after that, they were very, very interested in actually understanding how resilient they were to the cyber threat. So it was a wee wake-up call, because it was a near miss for most. And that was very useful, because suddenly we got buy-in at the highest level. And without buy-in at the highest level, you're really struggling. Because most folks see this is an IT thing, or IT people deal with that. It's a business risk, and it needs to be owned at the top level. So one of the things that we did after that, because everybody was compliant and wished to get involved and understand how they would manage this risk, is we've actually spoken about we need to be confident, and our citizens need to be confident, that in the public sector across Scotland, where we want to have a digital first approach, They should have confidence in our ability to provide digital services. So we want governance arrangements that actually have cyber as a risk owned at the highest level in the organisation. We want our organisations, where it's applicable, to go and get the threat intelligence for our technical guys so they can learn from others and implement the defensive mechanisms that are required to be there, because they're free. We want them to adopt the new NCSC active defence measures, which help organisations protect their network, which are free. And we want them to, at the very, very least, demonstrate that they have the ability to defend themselves against the most common internet-borne threats. And Cyber Essentials, as the very lowest level of the 5 technical controls that academics have proven actually do that. And irrespective if they're working to other higher or so-called higher level security standards, we wanted to be able to say that the public sector in Scotland was at least achieving this baseline standard, and that's the one we set. And very importantly, we wanted to address the issue of effective training and awareness, because people need to understand the nature of the threat. And organisations need to understand the threat before they can turn a threat into a managed risk. Because if you have no idea who wants your data and their capabilities to go and get that, what on earth are you managing? You know, how are you calculating that likelihood and impact on the risk if you actually have no idea of the threat against your organisation? So very keen to ensure that they're addressing these issues. And then the response piece, that resilient bit. So when it goes wrong, are we able to respond and recover sufficiently to get business as usual? So that particular action plan had a bit of teeth and with a lot of buy-in, which was great. And it was a first stage on our approach to say, well, we seek to improve the Scottish public sector. So it's fine having a baseline, but we'd like to work with you to improve that over time and escalate, where it's appropriate, the kind of confidence that we can have in the public sector's ability to do all of these things. And we sought to look at something that's very challenging, and that is everybody's operating to different standards, whether it's PSN accreditation for the public sector network or security policy frameworks, a whole bunch of frameworks, including ISOs and all the rest of it, that actually we felt was really just confusing if you wanted to understand as an organisation where your current security stance is and where it probably could be. And we felt there was probably a way to articulate that in a page, and everybody said it really couldn't be done. Well, it's definitely messy, but we've made a stamp at it. And we've also made a commitment to develop a security policy in relation to supply chain, which is a sensitive area when we're wanting small businesses to engage with us. But the truth is there's a real risk here in the supply chain, and we have to face that risk with our eyes open, and we have to set some expectations. But at the same time, we have to provide the tools for those who are engaged in this process to also come with us on the journey. So if we're going to set an expectation on standards, based on risk, then we need to offer up the businesses who are engaging with us in our procurement chains and our supply chains with some support to deal with that, and that's exactly what we're doing. So, in essence, here's a very simple look at what we see. This baseline is where the Scottish public sector in Scotland is at least achieving, but we expect most of them to be in at least the sort of target stage, so you can have some confidence about whatever it is standards they're operating to. But essentially, we would expect our public services to be in that space, and some we would expect to be pushing for much higher standards. So health and water are subject to the NIS, and it's much more exacting. But actually, even though that's the regulation, we expect other sectors in Scotland to be shooting for a higher standard, because the Scottish public deserve that on organisations that are handling our data. So we're in consultation with them about developing that and others. And we've done a bit of mapping, looking at the controls that are behind various standards used in the public sector. This has been a real difficult piece of work because they all feel a bit similar, but they're not apples. You're not comparing apples with apples. But in essence, we've sort of managed to do it with some confidence, so you could actually look at some of the high-end controls that are over kind of the NIST principles that are fairly international, and we can sort of map the kind of controls, the governance, and all the rest of it. So this is developed into a tool that we'll be launching soon that will help organisations make some sense of where they are and therefore their maturity and where they can be. And then it links directly into this very complicated slide because let's keep the writing small because it's all about procurement and that's designed to be difficult. So we are going to take a difficult step, and that is we will state our intentions in this space and we will provide the tools to allow a consistent approach for the Scottish public sector to allow them to assess the risk to contracts in a consistent way and allow those who wish to apply to engage with public contracts to have a very clear idea of what the expectations are. Because that's part of the challenge. It's a carrot and a stick, and we'll see this launched this summer. And critical to all the action plans that we've got, the public, private and third, is we're actually developed what we call catalysts, and this is a bunch of organisations from the public sector in this instance, 25 of them, who come together regularly to discuss issues, to knowledge share, to help us understand what's working, that we can share, and what's not working, and understand where the gaps are. And this catalyst group's become very, very important to us because it's helping us shape where we need to consider spending money. And it is about leadership, it is about knowledge sharing, and I can assure you from, the former police standing here, is criminals exploit our failure to share knowledge. They exploit our failure to share information that would help mitigate crime. And in this space, more than any. And organisations are really reluctant to air their dirty laundry. But in actual fact, criminals just love us for it. And they just love it because they can just leap from one organisation to the next, to the next, to the next, using the same exploit because we really don't share very much. Just jumping to the last one, we are looking for common challenges that we can, at the government, help resolve. These are our partners. And some of the work that's directly came out of the catalysts is a couple of bits of work on incident response, really, which is stuff I do like to talk about. And we are now creating incident response plans that would be fit for purpose for all of the public sector and probably beyond, to be honest, with the incident playbooks. And we expect them to start exercising around about this because very few organisations, not just in the public sector, but at all, really think about exercising the risks in this area, and we need to change that because that's how you learn. That's how you learn if you've got the right people in the right place who know the right things to do and can respond. That's where the resilience comes. And we're looking at security operations centres and what could be done differently in the public sector because no one public sector can really afford some of these solutions on their own. We need to think about some federated ideas. And very quickly, the private and third sector action plans, well, we have less teeth in this area, for sure, but they're designed to do the same sort of thing, to engage collaboratively with industry, to understand what the common asks and common risks are, and try to really raise the level of resilience in both. So they complement the work that's going on at a UK level, they complement the work in the public sector action plan as well. It's the same sort of idea, but with a much more ask rather than do. And it's exploiting the opportunities we have through really tight networks that we've created. And essentially, it's just the same. It's just trying to understand and share knowledge around about the risks, what's good, what works, where there are gaps, how do we help each other, even communicate consistent messages so we're not inadvertently just adding to the noise that's out there. And just bringing a greater coherence, whether it's in the public, private or third sector, about the kind of asks that we're making of organisations or expectations that we should have. And, again, these are the catalyst organisations. We've created these because we feel they're really useful to get the sense of the temperature that's going on within the markets. So in the private sector and third sector, we've collected these groups that kind of represent the broad section of the sectors to come and join us and help inform the decision making, and that's exactly what they do. And again, just picking on a subject, this idea of developing a common approach to cyber resilience across the private and third sector is very important to us. And this idea of having a framework that would allow organisations to understand what the opportunities are, to understand where they are and how they could progress. And it's a bit more complex, and showing you a very complex one. This is just a draft. Please just take the fact that the idea is based on risk. you can generally have a look across various standards, including the stuff that's coming from, and very importantly, the stuff that's coming from the NCSC, round about the steps that you could take if you're a very small business to a large corporate, and the kind of expectations that you might have round about your maturity. So we're trying to do it on a page, and that has been challenging, but we're consulting widely, and we think it's eminently doable, and there's still a bit of work to go in this. So if I'm a small business, and I want to do business with as part of supply chain, I can have a quick look and say, well, I'm down at the base level, but if I want to deal with some contracts with defence and such like, I maybe need to kind of be stretching myself up. And how do I do that? And what's the pathway? So this is really about creating a very simple pathway of understanding what your opportunities are. And again, same as the public sector, and we're starting to see it certainly in the private sector, the supply chain is a real key issue of risk for organisations. You can really batten down your own organisation, but the risk really can come from the supply chain. So, they are being more exacting in the kind of questions that they're asking. But across the private sector, they're doing it differently, and it's very confusing if you're a small business and you're trying to pitch in for various contracts. You're getting asked so many different questions. Often they feel the same, and it's a very confusing picture. So we're trying to rationalise that. And we funded a piece of work by Scotland, Creef got the contract, to look at a few sectors, including telecoms and energy and finance, and said, actually, are you making the same sort of asks in your supply chain procurement processes? And can we kind of capture some of that on a page to give small businesses, SMEs in this space, a bit of a clue what to expect? And what we found in this research is, broadly, yes, there are some very common asks, and we should try and articulate them. So we're working with the private and third sector and trying to kind of engage the private sector and third sector on this, so we can be a bit clearer, because it's about clarity. So that's what they're seeking to do. And we're trying to make it easy, so carrot and stick. We're trying to, in preparation for taking a position on security and supply chain, say, well, SMEs, we're going to start asking stuff of you if there's any form of risk. So, we spoke about a baseline. It's a good baseline, being able to defend yourself against the internet-borne threats. Cyber Essentials is that entry point. So here's some money. We're going to help you get through it. The money we'll give you will adequately get you through that. Come and get it. Currently, we can't give enough away to the third sector. Currently, we're really struggling to get the private sector SMEs interested, because there seems to be other stuff happening that's troubling them. And they're more interested. But we're trying to do that. And this is the second time we did something similar with the public sector to try and encourage them or take away some of the reasons that they would choose not to do this, because in actual fact there's other stuff going on in the world, not just the cyber threat. So we are trying to do that by encouraging people to say, in actual fact, Scotland has a reasonable baseline, and it's demonstrable. We can see it. And then finally, all of that work, all of these plans help contribute to creating that baseline, creating some confidence that Scotland's in a reasonably good place, and measurably so. But in actual fact, what we want to do is then seek to exploit an opportunity that's open to anybody. And that is, we want to create cybersecurity goods and services in Scotland. We want to be one of the places you would come to get some of that. And we're investing in some of that. We're creating a cluster management arrangements to try and encourage the growth and try and keep some of the skills in Scotland. And this is an important kind of part of the future. And we can do that because we've hopefully created the conditions, the right conditions are set in place that would allow us to do that. And this wouldn't have been possible a few years ago because we hadn't actually created the conditions. So that's work that's really just kind of starting to kick off. And Scotland IS and our enterprise agencies are kind of leading on that. And again, in all instances here, the National Cyber Security Centre are fully engaged in what we're doing here, and often actually see us as piloting new ideas. And in actual fact, you might not think it, but in some ways we're actually leading the advance in this area, which is great. And I think that's something to do with the fact that we're a reasonably small nation and we can move at some speed in this area. So that's kind of it just now. I'm going to leave it at that because that's the very quick step through a hell of a lot of work, if I'm being perfectly honest, that's been going on in the last sort of year and a half to help us get there. And critical to all of this is actually the leadership that we've got. We have a National Cyber Leaders Board that helps advise us and challenge us and advise and challenge the Deputy First Minister, who has a handle on this, and he will not let it go because it's the thing that keeps him awake at night. They come from the public, private and third sector. So we have, and we are advised by these group of people who help shape and frame all of what we're doing, because this is actually real and true collaboration. This is not government saying how it will be. We are definitely listening because we require the input from everybody. So, Brand Scotland and cyber, that's something aspirational. That will be the thing that we're hoping to achieve. It won't be 2020 because it's going to come and go, but it's the right aspiration to have. And that's about creating the conditions, and hopefully it's the conditions that we've actually created, and we'll see how that moves forward. And essentially, that's what I was hoping to speak to, and hopefully that's been about 20 minutes and no half an hour. Any questions? Sir? Oh, well, sorry, we're going to throw a ball at you.
We're going to throw a cube.
Well, I really wanted to throw that. This is my show. This should really be rugby ball shape.
So really interested in this supply chain security. My day-to-day role is in the business sector, going out to third parties and doing information security assurance. So that's my bread and butter.
Oh, you'll be welcomed by that.
I noticed there's, how you put on a page, sort of, because I look at a whole load of different businesses on different frameworks and trying to work out maturity. I noticed at the top you had a lot of using the word alignment with.
Yeah.
And I wanted to, I guess, get your feel of how hard you're holding people to that. So I often hear people saying they're aligned to NIST or ISO 27001, and that's just, happy thoughts and a bit of optimism more than anything. Whereas you get other organisations that are getting accredited to.
Yeah.
A key bit for me, and this is where actually I looked further down and you've got Cyber Essentials Plus. And I think actually I'd rather see an organisation that's had the independent view from someone coming in and actually putting them on a maturity path than someone who's got a wishy-washy sort of approach to saying, yeah, I'm aligned to ISO 27001.
Yeah. So when you're trying to persuade a nation to do something different and be accountable, you have to use, especially from government, some interesting language to allow the conversation, first of all, to take place. Because you need the foot in the door, and you need organisations to be willing to talk about what they're doing. Because until they're obligated in law, you have some difficulties, forcing an issue. So it's probably a bit like Cyber Essentials. People challenge the value of Cyber Essentials certification, self-certification. What does that mean? Well, the argument is, if it helps an organisation go from no knowledge to an awareness to do something positive, then actually it's highly helpful. The best place is to get that independent assurance. What we've asked in the baseline assessment, because I can assure you, public sector bodies, especially the complex ones, found some difficulties with Cyber Essentials because of the way it's quite linear in some of its asks. But what we asked, if you can't achieve Cyber Essentials Plus, because that's what we want, the independent assurance, then tell us how you're getting independent assurance of the 5 critical controls that make up Cyber Essentials, the thing that's about defending against the internet threat. Tell us how you're getting that, because that's the bit that we're wanting. So there will be this push towards, so how do you demonstrate that? How do you as an organisation demonstrate that you are, as many do, working towards ISO? What does that mean? But I think you need to get to the place to say, accepting that you want to be in that place in the first place, and then you can come along and think about, so how do you deal with audit? How do you deal with external audit? Yeah. Who gives you that independent assurance? And I think it's a maturity thing. So I think what we hope this on a page does is starts a conversation. get some people in fairly high places saying, it looks like we're there. I thought we should be there. How do we get there? Without getting bogged down in the technical talk. It's just meant to be a simple view that I think we should be pushing for here. And so that's the intention. We're getting some good feedback on that. We've had a lot of feedback saying this can't be done. You can't compare NIST with ISO, with whatever. They're different. But we think, in general terms, to real humans, you can do a comparison. You can make a very simple comparison that says low risk, very low risk organisations, small organisations, some basic stuff you can do. It's already here. But if you want to shoot higher, even if you're small and you're dealing with higher risk, this is kind of the expectations, so go for it. It doesn't matter which one you take. It doesn't matter if you go for the accreditation or not at this stage. If you're shooting higher than you are just now, and you're challenging yourself about where you actually are, then that's got to be good. So I know it's frustrating for you guys, but this should be helpful. It should be helpful that people are actually starting to have the conversations, whereas often they're not even having the conversation.
Thanks. I think there's time for one more question, and then it'll be lunchtime. I'm just down there.
Right from the back of my head. My voice would probably carry fine. Just in terms of small business, what is the route to access? Because it's great to have all the information, but if I have to go onto the government website to find the documentation, to find this, to find that, that is generally the biggest problem I find with a lot of small business and getting access to even money, knowing it's there in the first instance.
So the whole issue with cyber is actually about communication. I mean, it's so noisy out there with good intentions that, quite frankly, it's a massive turn-off. Probably not just in cyber, in everything. You know, information overload. We are constantly getting asked for where is the one place, the one place that you will find all the information. Rapidly, that is becoming the National Cybersecurity's website. You know, there's some really good resources there, but it doesn't cover everything. We're actually currently looking at who are the key influencers of all business, but particularly SMEs. And we're starting to think, you know, these key touch points, and they are the banks, they are the lawyers, they are the accountants. No small business doesn't deal with one of these three or all three. The police are still a trusted source of advice and guidance. Membership bodies, key membership bodies and organisations are still key people who are trusted to give messages. So we're starting to think about, rather than trying to just take everybody on us, let's really work with the key influencers who already have access, who understand the language that the organisations they're dealing with speak. And even our enterprise agencies, Highlands and Islands, Business Gateway and Scottish Enterprise, they're already engaged with business, providing support and developing their businesses. Can they also provide this with a small amount of knowledge? So we're actually trying to focus on how do you really engage a business to make them know, one, there's a threat, get it in proportion, because that's it, get the context right, and then offer them the support so they don't have to go and hunt for it themselves, because if you expect them to do that, it's not going to happen. And we're finding that, some of the evidence we're finding with the voucher scheme, who even knows it's there? You know, so it's a difficult one. How do you get the masses to pay attention when they're actually pretty busy people? So it is a challenge. Anybody want an answer to that, please tell us before we revise the strategy. That'd be great.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much. It's lunchtime now. This conversation can always continue over some surprisingly tasty food. We have different experiences in university catering, but this time they've done it very well. So thanks very much. And, well, there's more this afternoon.
I've done that.
Through the USB stick.
Sorry, I put it here.
That's not mine. Oh, down there. All right, okay. Cool. That's the other. Okay, brilliant. Thanks.